Welcome back. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and today we're going to talk about a very interesting Orient. In fact, it's maybe one of the more interesting Orient divers out there, but it is one that I wound up ultimately being disappointed in. This is the Orient M-Force AC0N, and I had some really high hopes for it, as it just has this really cool different design, kind of like a cross between a Seiko Landshark, Tuna, and Monster, all with a sandwich textured dial thrown in for good measure. Some of you may actually recognize this, as I got it from TUS Watches and I did an unboxing quite a while ago. But I never quite got around to doing a full review, partially because I was a little disappointed in it. So because of that, I just sort of threw it on the back burner. But these days, I'm trying to make room for some new additions, and I thought I should at least get something out there before trying to sell it. So here we are. Now let's start off with the specs. This one is quite a big one for Orient, with a width of 45mm and a lug-to-lug of 52. Although, as big as it is, I think it also has a relatively slim profile of 13.5mm. Relative being the key word here, as this does include a closed screw-down case back and these stylized crown guards that actually stick above the crystal. If you're going from just the case back to the top of the sapphire, then it's only 13mm. And that's also with 200 meters of water resistance, a signed screw-down crown, the flat sapphire already mentioned, and interestingly, 20mm lug width. Normally on a watch this size, you'd expect like a 22, so 20 does look a little small in comparison to the body size. But its bracelet is one thing that does help make this size a little more manageable. Not only because of its size, but because it's actually a fully articulating H-link style bracelet with female end links. Now it does have a pressed clasp like you'd expect, but other than that, it's actually the best bracelet I've ever seen on an Orient, not counting Orient stars. It's actually my favorite part of the watch, and I wish they'd use this on something like the Kamasu, as the female end links help bring in that effect of lug-to-lug, and the fully articulating H-link style helps it to easily conform to the natural curvature of your wrist. However, as good as this bracelet is, it's not quite good enough to make up for the size of the watch. And ultimately, this is really where my problem lies in wearing it. Typically, I do prefer smaller divers in the 40 to 42mm sizes, but I have worn a few larger ones in the past. And in fact, I'm wearing a pretty large watch right now to test out. So I kind of know what to expect with a 45mm, and unfortunately the AC0N wears even larger than that. Partially in thanks to its longer lug-to-lug and just the case design. With my 7.25 inch wrist, it really felt like I was wearing a large Captain America shield on my wrist. And as much as I tried, and I did try, I could never quite get used to it. When it comes down to it, I think the real problem here is these giant stylized crown guards. They're just massive and occasionally hit the back of your hand. So while they do look cool, they just always felt like they were getting in the way. The AC0N is also a fairly hefty watch on the wrist. I think weighing it in, it's coming in around 195 grams with a couple of the links taken off. So it's definitely beefy, and for me it's kind of hitting that point where it's not really comfortable to wear all day. Now if you are into larger watches, this might be a whole other story. And if you are, then this is a pretty cool one to know about. And the case itself is particularly interesting. I think it's similar to the other M-Force watches out there. It's a pretty odd combination, where on one side you have these aggressive industrial angles that wind up creating that oversized crown guard / bezel shroud, where on the other side it's just a smooth, organically flowing line from one lug to the other. In some ways, it reminds me a lot of the Seiko Monsters, where some people are going to look at it and think it's really cool, and others are going to think it's just way too weird. Now, one area that the AC0N differs from all its other M-Force siblings is with its bezel, where here it has a steel compass bezel rather than a black aluminum timing bezel. And since this is a compass bezel, it is freely rotating in either direction, with a surprisingly smooth action to it. Although one area that the bezel really falls short in is grip. Because there are these bezel shrouds on either side of the watch, there's only a couple places you can really grab onto it. And the bottle cap style knurling on it just doesn't seem to cut it at times. And especially when your hands are wet. I did take this swimming once, and for the life of me, I couldn't turn the bezel. so definitely not ideal if you're actually going to dive with it. The dial's also another area where the A-Z0N differs, as rather than your standard diver's dial with applied indices, here they've gone for this really unusual sandwich pattern, where they wind up mimicking the outline of the indices you normally expect to see. It's different, and I think it looks particularly cool on this black textured gradient dial, where you have the white LUME layer just peeking through. Then there's the handset in this gunmetal gray, which blends in nicely with the design, but there's still enough contrast to easily make them out. These are your typical MForce style handset, so they are slightly skeletonized. And in that way, it kind of reminds me of the handset on the Orient Star Diver, just maybe a little bit more aggressive here, which I think is fitting with the design, or at least part of the design. Overall, it's easy to read with a ton of contrast, and all paired with a very unusual dial and case design. And that unusual design is really what attracted me to the watch in the first place. It seemed like this mishmash of some of Seiko's grades, so I wanted to give it a shot despite the larger size. So as much as I wanted to like it, and I hate to admit it, but the size just wound up being too much for me. Now as for the LUME is pretty good. I just love how this sandwich dial comes to life when the lights go out. It's like something straight out of Tron. And since this is a sandwich dial and it's from Orient, I had some pretty high hopes for it. So in my comparison test, I immediately threw it up against two of the kings of LUME, the Phoebus Great Wall and the Orient Star Diver. But while the A-Z0N is able to keep up with a Seiko Turtle, that's just about it. So overall, it's good, not necessarily great. Movement-wise, you're looking at Orient's own in-house F6727, which really makes it sound fancier than it is. As far as I know, it's just going to be an equivalent to a Seiko NH35. As for value, I think originally these were going for about $600 US, but these days when I look around, it's more like $300, which is actually pretty good if you're looking for a larger diver. In terms of build quality, I'd say these are a little bit better than your standard Seiko Turtles or Samurai, and especially with the Sapphire and the Bracelet. So those are going to be its main competitors, and I think it kind of beats them out. Again, that's assuming you're good with a larger diver, and if so, this could be a good choice. And that's probably a good summary of the watch itself. This is an Orient with a really cool, unique design. And because of that design, it's one I just wanted to love. But ultimately, I just couldn't get over the size issue. However, if you're good with that 45mm size, and just importantly the 52mm lug-to-lug, this could be a good watch for you. So if your wrist is like 7.5, maybe 8 inches and above, it might be worth checking out. For everyone else, it's probably best just to pass on it. Anyway, as usual, let me know what you think about the Orient M-Force A-Z0N down below, as well as what's your favorite Orient. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, you all know what to do down below by now. Like, comment, subscribe, all that. It really does help the channel. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.